and I've got the thrill of introducing our first featured poet for Poetica 2025, Anne Gleeson. Anne and I go back about 15, 16 years. I think the first time we met was a poetry reading for the Dalesford Winter Festival, where we froze in a court case, with Lorraine McGuigan, just the three of us. And we've been friends ever since. She calls herself, when she publishes E A Gleeson, I once asked her what the E was, Elizabeth Ann. I'm prone to call her Elizabeth Ann. It sounds more poetical to me. Her poetry has evolved as her career and life circumstances have. Many of her poems reflect her professional interests in the last stage of life, telling the story of those whose voices are not heard, quirky moments in life, and her personal passions and interests. She's published 3 collections of poetry, and her 4th, The Deepest Thing, is to be published in May this year. She has presented her poetry in Ireland, the USA, do we do that anymore? Estonia, and most states in Australia, and is thrilled to be presenting once again in the poetry capital of Australia. That reminds me of an article I read in The Age some years ago, an interview with local novelist Alex Miller, who was quoted as saying, he lived in a country town of 8,000 people, 10,000 of whom were poets. When she talks about her passion, she did tell me, and never tell me any of your secrets. I'll broadcast them to a whole room of people, but she admitted to me she's got a passion for the name Robert. I'm one Rob, and her beau, Rob, is here. And maybe is that in the new book, The Poem on Roberts? No, it's not. I thought it might be The Deepest Thing, but perhaps we'll hear more about that soon. We're all in for a great treat. Would you please welcome Anne Gleeson.
Thank you, Rob, for that charming introduction. And my thanks to the 4 who are keeping this reading going, and to all those in Castlemaine. I feel like I've benefited a great deal. I've never lived in Castlemaine. I know there's not room for another poet. So I've lived in lots of places around Woodend, Dalesford, and now Kyneton. So I thought that I'd start with 2 poems just to let you know who I am. So these 2 are just a bit of an introduction to me. And Rob mentioned that I do a lot of work in terms of the end of life and not aged care, but people who are really close to the end of life. And of course, one of the things is that it makes me contemplate my own end of life. This poem is called Short Life, Long Death. Too much time hurtling by, crying wolf, way too shy, wasted too many early years, harbouring too many needless fears. Going slow, holding back, living like I was on Prozac, feeling like I had to fit in. Not so happy in my kind of skin, but something shifted. I started to feel how it could be without the weight of wearing a pseudo-me. Living in this disguise, a compromise I came to despise. Remorse and regret are not my scene. Didn't want to be, I could have been. Got rid of phrases like would, should, maybe, not yet. Acquired a more apt word set. You bet, this is the only life I get. So I started to make the most of it, and this required a major refit, adapted a can-do attitude and gave myself some latitude. I began to think outside the square, living life on a wing and a prayer, delighted in spontaneity, hitchhiked from this country to every place I wanted to see. I danced my heart out wherever I went, hell-bent on living a life well spent. Discovered the freedom of the odd free fall, twirling, whirling, risking all, to acquire the confidence capital. Above all, I gained the wherewithal to live my life as winner takes all. When I see a break, I shoot that space. This is the only time and place where I get to call the race. So when death stops for me, I will be ready to turn the page. I will not fight the rest I need, or rage against the dying of the light. The time will be right for others to find their creed, take a lead, seek their space, while I move from this vibrant place into the long quiet. The second poem I'm going to read, it started from the past and it's become more contemporary, but it tells you something about who I am and the people I love. And I have to say, despite the hiss before, I do have a son living in America, so the last verse becomes even more relevant. Praying the laps. When I finally manage to swim more than 10 laps, I wonder how people keep count. The man who shares my lane tells me he counts laps with the names of family. 4 children, 11 grandchildren, a father, 2 brothers, and the memory of a wife and mother. I begin counting laps, measuring progress with family. 3 children, 5 siblings, 2 parents, and then I do it again. Decades of laps. When I finally become fit enough to need more names, I add friends, former housemates, old colleagues, new colleagues. I try variations. I name off the 10 men I'd want to take with me on the Kokoda track, and another 10 for the Great Southwest Walk. I swim for my favourite poets and the people who live in my street. Up and down I swim, pacing it out, lapping it for each of them. Now I swim more slowly, choose my markers carefully. I pull myself up and down the lane, blue tiles overlay with filial film clips. My adventurer braving it out in another language. My city girl partying her life in a city that is not this city. Circling arms, will them to safety. I picture my risk taker, feel again his driving discontent. I cling to the memory of other times he survived. Waterborne in the city baths, I dare to hope again. How many of you have been to Vietnam? A few, okay. So this is my poem from Vietnam. Sometimes I write about things that really, really shock me, and there were, I think, lots of us, and I'm one, who has been to Vietnam and had a lovely time and enjoyed lots of things like the warm sun. But I was met with a girl, Quay, who told me that what I needed to write my poems about, and she took me to all sorts of places. And this poem is about that. This poem is called, Is This All There Is? We spend the whole day together and then the next. For me, it's as if we always had and always will have a part together. Quay becomes my teacher. I want to know how to behave in this different country. I learn that it is not okay to eat a naked banana, and eye contact is not such an important thing, though I notice that when we are part of the throng of motorbikes surging along Tran Hung Dao, she turns right around to talk to me. I am relieved when she leans forward again until I realise that she does this to read the map and answer her mobile phone. I am not sure of the protocol of gripping her buttocks with my knees, but as my jeans take the dust from the buses we pass, I am thinking about other things. Never have I felt such a part of a people's movement. There are more people on motorbikes on either side of me than could ever fit in a Swanston Street peace march. Quay weaves her bike through the city traffic as if these days are all that we have. She wants to show me what I need to learn. She cuts to the chase. She asks questions that I never asked before a third date. She points to the people whose disfigured bodies bend awkwardly. She tosses coins, chats to the locals, coerces officials. She takes me to see friends and the paintings that she loves. I feel as if I have met someone who might be a Buddhist, or that other rare thing, a Christian who knows what it is to love one another. When she is not asking questions, she is my tour guide. I begin to understand why the figure of Ho Chi Minh, whom I feared in my childhood, will always be Uncle Ho for her. She shows me what she wants me to understand and says, "This is what you need to write your poems about." I want her to tell me that these huts made from split boards and bits of tin are summer residences for the rice growers, shepherds' huts for the farmers, that way up in the hills, beyond the paddy fields, are cosy cottages all decked out with woven mats and polished teak, and that behind these are gardens full of vivid vegetables and bunches of bananas bowing from the trees. But I know before I ask the question that this is all there is. Each time we pass the Central Post Office, the man with the gummy grin is sitting in his cyclo smiling at the tourists because he does not have the quick repartee of the cyclo owners with the clean cotton covers and the sunshades. "Where you from, madame?" "Ah, my friend in Melbourne." "How can I help you?" "Special price for you, madame." Tell me that last week it was different, that the tourists hurried to his cyclo like children to a merry-go-round, that he took them to the mountain statue of Buddha and the huge church with its concrete Virgin Mary and said same but different and laughed at his own joke and the irony of it all. But I know that when we've ridden past late in the afternoon and he sprawled across the cyclo, that each day this is how it is. Hui takes me to visit the children whose parents were hit by the orange bombs. The crazy boy who is tied to his cot with his skin dropping onto the linen yells at me. And the girl who seems to be all torso and head reaches out and pulls me towards her, as if to show that for a hug, a neck is not necessary. There are children who stare blankly from misshapen bodies, and others who grin and bottom shuffle towards us, clutching at our hands, rolling us the ball, peeking into our bags. As we walk from the last room in the Peace Hospital, where the children's heads are bigger than any of my questions or answers, I turn and ask, "Hui, what do you believe?" And she tells me, "I don't believe in anything. I know there is nothing but this." Another thing that has shocked me is learning about the Eastern Mar country where I grew up, and down south from Camperdown is Peterborough, the town of Peterborough, and if you walk along the beach there you'll see the middens, but it was an Indigenous man who told us about this story. The point that I'm writing about here is called Massacre Point. For years, we turned eastwards beyond the town, over the river, out along the wide expanse of beach. We had created sand castles, sand cities, spent whole afternoons running between them and the gentlest of surfs, dipping in and out of waves, floating in the blue, flipping under the white foam. A parent's call brought us in, always too soon. Returning years later, we veer westwards out along the new walking track. We amble through Heath and Boobiella beyond Worm Bay and Wild Dog Cove. At Hallidale Point, we read the smart signage, pause by middens, waves hurtle towards us, smash at the cliffs. We walk on past other gathering sites, cliff paintings. Our guide tells us women and children were rounded up in the swampland, men herded to the top of this cliff. Sharper than memories of sibling comparisons of sandcastles and shell finds, or the triumphant calls to parents after the first bracing dive. Louder than cave calls, the whoosh of waves into the hallowed limestone, or the walloping against Schomburg rock, is the sound in my head of children whimpering, women wailing as gunshots ring back to them, while down on the beach the bodies of men tumble, thud onto each other. One of the things I like to write about is quirky things or things that catch me by surprise or discoveries. And so I've got a couple of poems that are about things that have absolutely captured my imagination in one way or another. I'm not telling you whether this is from my imagination or if it's real life that I've experienced. It's called Symmetry of Sound, and some of you might know much more about whales and their sound patterns than I do. But did you know? When the humpback whale returns to its pod, it takes up the sound at the same tone and volume it emitted as it moved southwards. In the way a spouse who has spent a whole day in an air-conditioned office can walk into the house and take up the argument in the exact voice used as the door banged against the heat of the morning. The next poem I'm going to read, it's kind of for you, Brian. One of the things that totally amazed me about learning about the Second World War was learning about Erwin Rommel, the general, German general who received so much respect from both sides. And when I learnt about the end, when the invasion was planned and, of course, Erwin Rommel was to be depended on, but he had something else on his mind at that time because the signs were not as predicted. So I've called this poem Happy Birthday, Lucy Rommel. So 6th of June 1944. Fooled by the full moon, wrong weather, wrong tide, sensing the deep in the mud, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel slips into the dark, rehearsing his pleas to Hitler for men and guns, to the gods for a night with you, that's with Lucy. Spooned against each other, breath on your neck, soft and steady as the landing of 1,000 paratroopers dropping into Normandy. Not wanting to lose this time in sleep, you stare into the street. The gas lamp glowers back at you. Half a country away, skies flame with Allied bombers. 4,000 warships shuttle back and forth across the channel, shoving concrete harbours in the sand, dumping men and tanks. The phone shrieks through the Rommel house. Holding yourself so still, you hear the handpiece click onto its cradle. He's bounding the stairs and calling, the invasion has begun. For just a moment, he cradles your head against him, and then he's gone, leaving you wondering if this night really happened, until you step into the hallway, and there on the oak cabinet, a birthday card pasted with pressed poppies and a tiny pair of French slippers. I don't know if anyone in the audience is wearing a cochlear implant, but that was another thing that absolutely intrigued me, how this discovery was made of how it could work. Professor Graham Clark said this: I couldn't work out how to get the electrode bundle to go round the tiny spiral, and it bothered me day in and day out. So they are his words, and then the others are mine in the poem. In the scented stillness of a Saturday, you drift across the dunes, soaking in spring's warmth, idly plucking at grass, pulling the young stems from their darker sheath, your eyes drawn along the thicker, tighter tube of lighter green, your fingers tracing the progressive stiffness, and then you see it, lodged in the sand. You're on your knees gazing into your palm as if it were a petri dish containing a lifetime's work. As you ease the grass into the curve of shell, you know that it can be done. Rob mentioned that I have a book coming out in a few months called The Deepest Thing. And The Deepest Thing actually refers to the Naomi Shihab Nye poem, which you might be familiar with. And she says, you know, to know kindness, you must also know the other deepest thing, which is sorrow. And she tells a wonderful story about a tragedy that she encountered. But I used the title to tell the story of my sister, who's lived with disabilities all her life, the primary one being an intellectual disability. And so that's what my next book is principally about, although there's heaps of other poems because of all the living that happens around that. This poem is not in that book, but it is a poem that I wrote about being the child of a sibling. So I was in primary school when this event occurred. It's called Red Poem 1. When my mother brought home the fabric, I slipped it from the brown paper bag, 1.5 meters of green and white checked lawn, and 2 skeins of embroidery thread. This fabric became an apron, and I became Snow White, Cinderella, a princess. As I whirled around the kitchen, its gathers giving me the hips I didn't have. At school, we sketched images onto the fabric. I drew fruit, an apple, an orange, a banana. I pictured these penciled lines becoming blood red fruit, loving the idea of my crimson dimpled apple, a matching orange with a stitched cross nestled in its hollow, the thick banana tip, a stretch of scarlet stitches. I didn't hear the teacher telling us to hold the thread to the left as we spiked the fabric. All I knew was the raggedy result. Perhaps she saw my distress. Perhaps she didn't. When I was called to the front, she took my apron, muttered something about retarded. She said it so softly, only I heard the word. So loudly, I hear it every time I wear an apron. And now I'm going to finish up with 2 poems, and they're kind of blessing poems. I haven't really read any nature poems today, and of course I love writing about the landscape, but this one is getting a little bit close. Some of you would be familiar with the story in the New Testament about the lilies in the field, so it's kind of referencing that, but pretty, lots of metaphors. Instructions to the lilies of the field. Let yourselves become. Do not fret the rain or the wind or the length of summer. Bloom wildly when warmth comes. Allow yourself to be bent by the wind. When heat beats at you, shrivel a little. Draw into yourself until you are ready to bear it again. When rain comes, soak in it. Feel it on and in every part of you. Let sunlight toil in your cells. Let it be the miracle worker. Carbon dioxide and water into oxygen. When the butterfly alights on you, uphold it. Embrace the spin of a spider. Toiling and spinning is not for lilies. You do not need to outsmart aphids and slugs. This is work for your visitors. Let the hoverfly hover. Let the praying mantis pray. Do not be embarrassed or coy when admirers notice your splendour. Give yourself to this encounter. Do not be troubled by the browning of your elegant leaves. Take delight in absorbing energy, so that in the cold, dark months when you need to burrow in, you have something left to give. And my last poem, is also from this book. It's called Peonies, but it is a blessing for you all. Peonies. I want to give you abundance, almost too much. Bud, brushing bud, nearly bruising as each opens. I want to give you colour, the blush of this one and the innocence of this other. And this one, rich as mischief in its layers of ruby velvet. I want to give you fragility, flower heads on a precipice of stems, readying to fall, petal by petal, that you might know shadow and light, that you will know loveliness again and again. When I have given, may you wear these blooms, a garland of love, a crown of worth. Hold tightly the bouquet of them all through your lives.
What a wonderful start to poetry in Poetica for this year. That was absolutely beautiful, Anne. Thank you so much. Can we applaud Anne? That was wonderful.